Hello there, you're watching the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. So it's time to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of the Daily Mirror and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. So very good evening to both of you. Really good to see you both. I'm pleased to say that both Pippa and Harry will be here with us until just before midnight. So let's take a look then at what's making tomorrow's front pages. And the Eye carries the stark headline, Putin bombs civilians, showing the skyline of Kiev ablaze. The Financial Times pictures a destroyed Ukrainian tank on the streets of Kharkiv after Russian forces launched a heavy assault on the city. The Guardian reports Russia's assaults on Ukrainian cities defies Western sanctions and peace talks. Barbaric. The Times headlines with the Prime Minister's comment about Russian strikes on Ukraine. The Sun leads with a photo of a 10-year-old girl who was shot dead with her parents by Russian soldiers. Her name was Polina. Meanwhile, the Metro quotes a doctor who tried unsuccessfully to save the life of a 6-year-old child who was hit by a Russian shell. He told a camera crew, "Show this to Putin." The outrage at that little girl's death is also the main story for the Telegraph. Fight for the innocence, the plight of children during this conflict, also features on the front of the Mirror. That same photo is on the Express, but with the headline, "Monstrous." The Daily Mail contrasts with the humanity of its readers, who've raised over £1 million for the Ukrainian people, with what it insists is Vladimir Putin's inhumanity. And in a moment of rare levity, the Star shows a Ukrainian farmer attempting to tow a Russian tank off his land with his tractor. And just a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers for yourself while you watch us. And so let's bring in Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole to go through some of those front pages. And Pippa, day 5 of Russia's invasion, and as you would expect, once again, all the front pages dominated with some bleak headlines about the war there. You've picked out the Eye, first of all, with the headline, Putin bombs civilians. And it's that statement, but also that mood that kind of dominates the front pages tomorrow, doesn't it?
Yes, many of them feature either, as the Eye does, buildings which have been destroyed by attacks by the Russians, or indeed images, very sort of moving, emotive images of children that have lost their lives as a result of it. And of course, what you need to remember is that we're approaching the end of the 5th day of this conflict, and Vladimir Putin is not going the way that he expected to. Everything that Western intelligence agencies and Western leaders tell us is that he expected to be able to storm in, meet very little resistance from Ukrainian forces, let alone Ukrainian people, and for President Zelensky and his entourage to flee the country and to very quickly be able to install a puppet regime and then withdraw, but keep Ukraine in its orbit, in Russia's orbit, a sort of, trying to recreate the Soviet Union, if you like. And that hasn't happened. He has met fierce resistance from the Ukrainian military, backed up by with weapons and support from Western allies. And he's met fierce resistance from people. And his tactics, as a result, have changed. He's got increasingly frustrated. He's faced with anger on the streets at home in Moscow and across Russia. And that is only likely to intensify as the West steps up its sanction regime. And he is really, I think, probably in a position now where he's desperate to get results soon. And therefore, what we're seeing today is an escalation of the sort of tactics that he's prepared to use, focusing on civilians, focusing on civil targets, and potentially committing war crimes in some of those instances. And the Eye, like I say, is sort of encapsulated all with its summary on the front of what has happened today. Obviously, Kiev is being circled, and the second biggest city, Kharkiv, has been targeted. Russians have stepped up the bombing campaign there. Heavy civilian losses. And very sadly, we're likely to see more of it in the days to come.
Well, that's right, Harry. And moving on to the Financial Times, they actually concentrate on Kharkiv, the second biggest city in Ukraine. Russian rockets pound Kharkiv. And day 5, And not a single city has been taken so far by Russia in Ukraine. And as Pippa was hinting there, this suggestion that the tactics are changing and that the weapons being used are ones that are more indiscriminate and casualties therefore rising sharply.
Yeah, quite chilling briefing we had tonight, actually, from what we will enigmatically describe as Western officials, who say that some of the images of the weaponry that Putin is bringing up from the border up the supply lines, just the sheer force and scale of it means that it has to be, just by the laws of physics, more discriminatory in its horrible power. But the problem is that he is clearly, as Pippa said, well behind target. Kyiv taking a hell of a pounding today on what looks suspiciously like indiscriminate weapons aimed at civilians, which is a war crime, which perhaps does show that frustration. But there's just an element of poor planning going on in the fact that his bridging equipment is stuck at the back of the lines. Some parts of his assault are moving too quickly to be refueled. And despite this build-up that's been going on from November, this does feel awfully rushed. And there was some really interesting stuff floating around tonight about the fears that the West have in the fact that perhaps Putin is not taking advice. He might, in fact, be running a lot of these military decisions himself, overruling people that would know better. And the circle around him in the Kremlin is as small as many in Western intelligence circles could ever remember it. Even in the heights of the Cold War, they had the Politburo, they had the generals, they had the staff there. These were at times collective decisions. So there's a real worry that actually we're dealing with an entirely unpredictable enemy who is perhaps not making the most rash decisions. And that's when it becomes really scary. I think there's sort of 24, 48 hours for him to sort of sort out the slightly botched start to the attack before I really hope we don't start seeing him lose his temper.
Well, yes, and let's move on to the Metro, shall we, Pippa, because here is a headline that's actually repeated on a couple of the papers. Show this to Putin. And these are a doctor's words, aren't they, after he failed to help a little girl who was hit by a shell.
Yeah, there's a very striking image which is on the front page of several papers of the girl being treated by doctors. You can just see in the background there the paramedic with the red outfit on, little girl lying on an ambulance trolley, and her mother in the foreground with blood splattered on her hat, looking absolutely distraught as the doctor struggled to save her life. And there was video footage which showed a doctor who'd been aiming to save the life of this 6-year-old, turning to the camera and angrily saying to Putin, when they realised, the medics, that this was not going to be successful and that the little girl had lost her life, show this to Putin. The anger and the heartbreak of the medics that were trying so hard to save an innocent. And the Ukrainians have announced today, you show the Sun there, there's another child, 10-year-old Polina, features on the front of a couple of papers. I mean, she looks like many 10-year-olds that I know, cheery smile and that pink hair, trying out the latest hairstyle. The Ukrainians have said that 16 children were killed in Ukraine in the first 4 days. That will have inevitably risen in the last 24 hours as the attacks have become more focused on civilian areas, on blocks of flats, on cars. There's a terrible reportage about a car which was attacked, which had 3 children in it who were effectively incinerated alive. These are sort of standout, awful, tragic moments in this conflict so far. But as the days go on, we will inevitably hear and see more of them. And I think that's what's most striking to people watching what's unfolding in Ukraine from abroad. The fact that we hear stories of men being asked to stay in Ukraine to fight, men who have no military experience, and sending their daughters and their wives and their girlfriends and their mothers overseas to safety, or at least to other parts of the country that aren't sort of right in the firing line. And these men feel it's their duty and responsibility to protect them and to protect their country. But, frankly, God knows what they're walking into in the coming days. And, we're very early on in this conflict, really, and all the suggestions from Western officials, from Western intelligence and from our government and others is that this is likely to be a protracted, lengthy fight, that the Ukrainians are not going to give up their country. The Russians are determined not to lose face, and the results potentially are going to be horrific.
And I just want to show the front page of the Daily Telegraph next, because, again, "Show this to Putin" is their headline as well. And in the copy, it does talk about Russia being accused of war crimes. It quotes the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court saying he would soon begin a war crimes investigation into the Russian invasion. But, Harry, I want to move on to The Guardian, if that's OK. Their main headline says Russia's deadly raids defy sanctions and peace talks. So let's talk a little bit about both of those elements. Peace talks, first of all. While these raids were going on, there were also peace talks underway in Belarus. They didn't come up with any conclusions. We understand that there will be talks again in the next few days. But should we be encouraged at all that there is some diplomacy happening?
Yes, of course. They're always, it's better to keep those lines of communication open. But the absurdity of the Russian demands of a demilitarization of the Ukraine and a permanent neutrality and a permanent signing up not to join to NATO, they're going through the motions, but these are not serious. These are not serious talks. I don't think they will become serious talks until the man in the Kremlin starts to feel the heat. Now, we had the first day of that today. I think one of the most striking images wasn't, gazillionaire yachts being sort of sunk or people trying to shift their assets out of Moscow, in bank accounts from Switzerland and various things like that. I thought it was a really striking image of people queuing up at the underground station in Moscow, and their Apple Pay and their Google Pay and their smartphone Apple wallets or whatever it is they use on the metro isn't working because of those restrictions. And that's, I think, where it's going to be really interesting if you can turn the public against Putin, not forget the oligarch class, turn the public against him. I think it could move quite quickly.